What's going on, guys? It's your boy Daniel DeBrocke here. Thanks so much for jumping on the podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Bill Campbell. So this is Bill's second time on the show, and today we're going to be talking about how to lose fat without losing strength. I know this is something that a lot of lifters really struggle with because especially nowadays where social media is available, we're seeing more powerlifters who are actually like in shape, and so it's kind of becoming a little bit more of a draw that people want to actually be in shape and as well as be strong. So first off, Bill, thanks so much for jumping on again, man. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you for the invite. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah. So for those of you who maybe didn't, or sorry, for those who didn't maybe catch the first episode or who aren't really familiar with you, can you give a little bit of a background of who you are and kind of what you've been doing?
Sure, yeah. So I got my PhD from Baylor University in exercise, nutrition, and preventive health. That was 2007. And I am now a professor of exercise science at the University of South Florida, which is in Tampa, Florida. And there I direct the Performance and Physique Enhancement Laboratory. So my research areas initially was sports nutrition, then it went into powerlifting for a while. And then for the last 5 years, it's been really focused on fat loss through different diets, resistance training, dietary supplements. So I'm in the bodybuilding world of research, so to speak, even though my research primarily serves what most people call lifestyle clients. That they're people who are very serious about their exercise and their nutrition, and they want to look like bodybuilders, but they don't necessarily have a plan to step on stage. So that's where my current research has been focused. Other than that, what else has been going on? I have a research review coming out. We'll talk about that after we get through the main meat of our conversation. So I'm very excited about that. I think that's about it. I just got back from the International Society of Sports Nutrition's annual conference. So we got to present some data there. But other than that, I think everything's pretty stable, which is kind of like my boring life.
That's awesome, man. What a cool name for a lab too. That's pretty awesome. So I guess the first place to start is when a lifter is looking to decrease their body fat. A lot of the times it kind of comes at an arbitrary time. So before the actual commencement of any sort of fat loss diet, what are some important considerations that a performance-based athlete needs to kind of take into consideration prior to either starting or even designing their program?
All right. And I'll give a little context. I've looked at this in detail because, again, I do diet research. That's what I do: caloric restriction, caloric deficits. My main focus has been on preserving muscle mass. So in our conversation, we're going to talk about strength, but I'm going to make the assumption that if you maintain your muscle mass, you will also maintain your strength. Now, that may or may not be true, and I know that's a very hot topic amongst some people in our space. Like, is there a relationship between strength and size? But for our purposes, because I know the research on muscle size, maintaining that, and I think there is more research on that than there is in this powerlifting world in terms of dieting. So grant me that, and then we can get into those nuances if that's true or not. If we, because I obviously you're an expert in this area as well, so I'm sure you have thoughts on this.
I think practically it's a pretty decent proxy personally. Like if you maintain, the vast majority of your muscle mass, you're probably also simultaneously doing as good a job as you possibly could to preserve your strength. So I think it's a fairly reasonable thing to assume anyway. So I'm right on board with you.
Okay. Yeah. And it's funny, in the bodybuilding world, as we have competitors dieting, we use strength as a proxy for their muscle mass for people who can't get continual assessments. So we use it both ways. So I guess I would start, you have two options to lose fat, two primary options. Well, I guess three if you want to throw in supplements, but a power lifter or performance-based athlete can either reduce their calories or they can increase their cardio. So with a strength-based athlete, there's a little bit of fear, and I would say justified, if you're relying on aerobic exercise or cardio as your primary means to lose body fat. So I would push the effort more into a caloric deficit. So the first thing that I would say is that you want to guard against is extremes. So if you are going to reduce your calories by 50% for a period of time, just know that you are signing up for a loss of, you're going to lose strength, you're going to lose fat-free mass. So that would be the first thing. Let's avoid extremes. Let's avoid the polar efforts where, again, you're in a situation where you're just going to just starve yourself. You're asking, yeah, you will lose fat, no question, but you're going to lose muscle mass and you're going to lose strength. So there's the global picture. Be very, so I guess I'll just summarize globally. Let's avoid extreme cardio. So relying on cardio 100%. And let's avoid severe caloric deficits. I don't know if you wanted to comment back on those. Again, this is big picture stuff right now.
Yeah, so I would actually like to go into your perspective on cardio, and I guess we can kind of expand the scope of cardio to just sort of down to general physical activity. So maybe things like walking or trail hiking or different things that are maybe lower impact or higher impact cardiovascular type training. So if you wanted to go into that, I think that would be really interesting. Because I think that does have a reasonable amount of practicality for power lifters, or at least like, especially recently, there's been more interest in it.
So here's where I am going to have to delineate hypertrophy or lean mass and strength. So what the research suggests in terms of cardio and lean mass, I like to refer to it as concurrent training. Some people call it the interference effect. What we see in the literature is not what's commonly perpetuated in the space, meaning that adding cardio to your resistance training program really has no impact on your muscle mass. Now, I'm going to talk about some caveats to that research literature because they're big. But if you're just looking at the data, and I did this, I took a deep dive on this, and one of the things that I did was I separated the more general body composition measures like DEXA and skin folds and ultrasound. So we call those two compartment models. Generally speaking, no. Well, let me preface it with this before people get too excited. Almost all of these studies were in non-resistance trained males. So we don't have people with a lot of muscle mass going around. And remember, this only applies right now. We'll start getting to the strength literature. This only applies to maintaining lean mass when adding cardio to a resistance training program. But the DEXA, the ultrasound, the underwater weighing, they didn't really show a decrease. Then if you go to the MRI data, same thing. In fact, a few studies would suggest with MRI data, they actually gain lean mass when you're adding cardio to resistance training program. And then we also have this category of muscle fiber. So you get this from biopsies. That data, the area, the muscle fiber area, also no real negative impact from adding cardio. Now, the important aspect here, the population is previously non-resistance trained males. So what happens if we have somebody who's enhanced or who has just carries a lot of muscle mass? Does that same data apply to them? Well, based on the evidence, we don't know. So that's where I'm going to rely on the experienced people in the space. What are they experiencing? Strength is a little different. My research on strength was if cardio got too high, and this is not walking, this is not trekking, I forget what the other term you used. If the aerobic activity was too much, we did start to see some decreases in maximal strength, and particularly in the lower body. Now, would that happen with walking? I don't know. I think it would be much less likely, if at all. But that was my interpretation of the literature in strength-based athlete. There's a little bit more of a justified fear if you're a strength athlete, no fear if you're a recreational lifter. And then we have to get into, like you said, walking, maybe weighted vest stuff. I just don't know. And that's where I would ask you, what do you think? What have you observed in that area?
Yeah, I kind of tend to agree with you on that as well. I think that it's less about like an actual interference effect and just sort of a reallocation of recovery resources, right? Like if you think of it as like a bucket and we fill the bucket 80% up with your resistance training and then we do 20% cardio, you're not going to be able to exert as much effort or focus and attention on your training and your recovery. And so it's sort of the way I see it. That's sort of how I think a lot of strength athletes sort of view it, at least basically in the circles that I'm in. So basically the same thing as you, but I suspect it's more a byproduct of um, not necessarily being able to recover, as opposed
Yeah.
to like some sort of mechanistic, interference mechanism or feedback.
I love how you, I just love the language. It's not so much about the interference effect, which is physiological. It's potentially, I guess I would caveat that,
Mhm.
to your to your allocation of recovery resources. That's I like that. That's a different paradigm of thinking, which I don't think that's been. It's always, this area is always researched on the interference effect,
Mhm.
what happens in the cell, or the outcome of strength. But I like the idea of the paradigm of a recovery.
Yeah, cool. I mean, I'll take the compliment. No big deal. um, yeah, no, I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense though what you're saying, as far as like differentiating between obviously sort of like just general recreational lifters, bodybuilders, and then obviously strength athletes. So I think that's really really great advice. And so getting into the dietary component, then looking at caloric restrictions. Obviously, you're saying, avoiding those polar extremes of, 50% caloric reduction or something, as a proxy of that. So where would you potentially start an individual, and then how might you progress that process from a dietary standpoint?
Yeah, so there's three caveats here, or three principles, which everybody's going to do the one. You have to continue to train. Like, you have to have that stimulus. So again, I don't think we're worried about that in your audience. So just continuing to train at a high intensity. Let's assume that's being done. Now, what do we do with diet? And again, now I'm going to go back to the assumption that if we maintain muscle mass, we're going to maintain strength. We've done multiple weight loss studies in my lab in fit people, and pretty much the perspective that we take is what I would call a moderate caloric restriction. So it's not real, it's not conservative, and it's not aggressive. And what that is once you have your maintenance calories, so if you know how many calories you can eat and not gain or lose weight, if you know that value, if you reduce that by 25% over 6, 8, 12 weeks, the data from my lab and in others, that seems to be a great approach to induce fat loss and maintain muscle mass. Now, the other pillar here is, we already said you have to continue to resistance train or strength train. The other is you're going to have to prioritize protein out of those calories. So what we've done in my lab is anywhere from 1.6 grams per kg to 2.2 grams per kg, or that's about 0.75 to 1 gram per pound. So as long as you're within